It's the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you receive expert fantasy advice for champions. With your host, NFL fantasy football expert, analyst, and draft scout, Lance Goodman. Hello, NFL football fans, fantasy football owners. Welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. As always, I'm your host, NFL fantasy football expert, analyst, and draft scout, Lance Goodman. Got a great show lined up for you today called Today's Lesson. For those of you who are new or unfamiliar with the way things work here at NFL Explorer, we're going to be utilizing our NFL Explorer Fantasy Football Rankings Board, which was used coming into the season to help fantasy football owners with their live drafts. The first couple weeks of the season, our main focus and concentration is on tracking trends, tracking patterns, tracking data, getting the information, really finding out what's going on with these players around the league. And then after week 3, which is the week we're heading into, the next time you see me here on the Extra Points, on a bi-weekly basis, we're going to be adjusting our rankings accurately according to player performance. And in between weeks, we're going to be hitting the stock market, taking a look at what players are trending up and down in regards to their value. So let's go ahead, bring up our NFL Explorer rankings board. We're going to start at the quarterback position, and let's go through our tiers 1 through 32 and really look at some guys who are standing out or may be in a bit of trouble early on. Starting at number 1, Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens has been absolutely ridiculous, amazing, unbelievable, special, unique, gifted, awesome, whatever superlative it is that you want to use. But this guy is an all-world talent. He is the only quarterback ranked in our top 5 coming into the season who has already been in the top 5 the first 2 weeks of the season. That is an extremely comforting feeling for fantasy football owners, considering we still have 15 weeks to go. A guy who has not performed well so far this season. We're talking about Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles, 125 yards per game, 0 passing touchdowns. If it weren't for his 3 rushing touchdowns so far this season, this guy would be pretty much at the bottom of the barrel, and that is absolutely unacceptable. We got some bad news coming in this week. Our number 5 prospect coming in, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals, unfortunately suffered a toe injury that's going to cause him to have surgery. He's going to be out the next 3 months at the bare minimum. It's a huge blow for fantasy football owners, myself included. Burrow had over 4,900 passing yards and 43 TDs. It is difficult to replace that type of production in your lineup. Let's talk about Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions, our number 6 prospect. Showed why he was a guy who was right on the edge of that top 5. 41 big points in fantasy football yesterday. When Jared Goff is at home for the Detroit Lions, he is a must start. That Lions offense likes to light up the scoreboard and play at a super fast pace at home. At number 10 is the savvy vet Matthew Stafford. Want to give him a shout out. He may be 37 years old, but can still spin it. Got a dominant number 1 receiver like Puka Nacua, and veteran Devonta Adams seems like he's going to be a perfect fit for that Rams offense. A guy that I have some concern about at number 11 is CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans. I know there's been injuries to receivers, there's been injuries to the offensive line, but at the end of the day, this is a show and prove business. There are other quarterbacks making it happen with the same or less. If he's the guy who we think he is, tonight against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be a great way to start showing us that. I've got 3 quarterbacks for you: Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. Those 3 guys' ceiling of potential could be even higher as the year goes on. All of those guys playing with some injuries right now. When we talk about Baker Mayfield, at some point, he'll get wide receivers Chris Godwin and Jalen McMillan back. When we talk about Patrick Mahomes, at some point, he'll get his wide receivers in Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice back. Brock Purdy himself is out injured right now, but if he can get his full cast of receivers in Brandon Ayuk, Ricky Pearsall, Jawan Jennings, Demarcus Robinson, along with tight end George Kittle in the mix, all of those guys have a high ceiling of potential, and you may see them playing their best football the second half of the season. I've got a couple guys for you who had strong bounce back weeks in Tua Tagovailoa, Bo Nix, and Sam Darnold of the Seattle Seahawks. At number 19, Jordan Love is off to a hot start. I think the concern with him is, can his group of wide receivers stay healthy? Already without Christian Watson working his way back from an ACL injury. Jaden Reed broke his collarbone this past week, so that could be a concern. We're also looking for Justin Herbert to continue with his hot start that he had in week 1. This week, on paper, very favorable matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. He's got 3 viable targets in Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, and Keenan Allen at wide receiver. When we look at quarterbacks 21 through 32, the guy who's standing out without question is going to be Daniel Jones of the Indianapolis Colts. Really a huge vote of confidence for any owners who were looking at him this week at home against arguably the best defense in the NFL in the Denver Broncos, and Daniel Jones went out there and killed it. He is a guy right now who fantasy owners want to take a huge look at when you talk about the waiver wire. All right, now let's go over to the tight end position. We're on our boards 1 through 10. You know, Travis Kelce is off to a solid enough start, but had some mental lapses here. In week 1, stopped on a route where if he simply would have continued on, he could have had a touchdown. And then this past week against the Philadelphia Eagles, dropped a touchdown. It was right in his hands. Not sure if his mind is on wedding plans with Taylor Swift. Not quite sure if his mind is on his podcast with his brother, but this guy needs to get it together. It may not mean a lot in the small scheme of things, but I can guarantee you those couple TD catches, even if it was a handful of fantasy football owners, it cost them a win in one of their matchups in the past 2 weeks. Now, when we look at the rest of the top 10, everybody is in pretty good shape so far. I think the guy that's really standing out is number 9, Tyler Warren, the rookie from the Indianapolis Colts, became a hot commodity as live drafts were starting to approach and go on. The rookie has come out with 2 strong performances, ranking inside the top 5 fantasy football tight ends. If he can continue up at the pace he's at, without question, that's going to make him a great value pick. Now, let's go ahead and talk about Jake Ferguson. He had a nice bounce back this game against the New York Jets. We know that George Kittle, unfortunately, out with that hamstring injury. At number 7, David Njoku, numbers have not been bad, but it seems like rookie Harold Fenton Jr. is chewing into his work. The guy we've got the biggest amount of concern about is TJ Hawkinson of the Minnesota Vikings, with young quarterback JJ McCarthy struggling early. Very hard to trust him in your lineup when you talk about looking for big points at fantasy football. When we round out our list 21 through 32, we've got 2 guys who are certainly coming into focus and looking great. It's going to be Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. Had a big game on Thursday Night Football with the injuries to those Green Bay receivers. He could see an uptick in targets and production. And then how about Juwan Johnson of the New Orleans Saints, ranking inside the top 5 fantasy football tight ends for 2 weeks in a row. All right, look, that is going to wrap up our first segment here. We're going to run to a quick break. Don't go anywhere. It'll be more the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show here with NFL Explored. Football fans, fantasy football owners, welcome back to the Extra Points, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. Let's go ahead and continue on with our rankings board. We're 2 weeks into the season. Let's take a look at how our running backs now have been performing for you through the first 2 weeks. When you look at our top 10 running back, I think these guys are an absolute lock. Everybody has made their mark in one shape, form, fashion, or another. When you look at Saquon Barkley, he's averaging 18 points per game. Jahmyr Gibbs averaging 17 points per game. Bijan Robinson averaging 22 points per game. Christian McCaffrey averaging 23 points per game. Derrick Henry at 16 points per game. Both Devin Achane and Jonathan Taylor averaging 21 points per game. Josh Jacobs at 14 points per game. And to lead all fantasy running backs through the first 3 weeks is none other than James Cooks of the Buffalo Bills, 24 points per game. Production is down a little bit for Rams running back Kyren Williams, but I'm sure in the long run, he'll be absolutely fine. Now let's move on to running backs ranked 11 through 20. And we've got a mixed bag of emotions here, but for the majority, things are looking very promising for everyone that's on this list. So let's go ahead and start with the good. At number 14 for the Arizona Cardinals, James Conner has scored a touchdown in both of the first 2 games. At 15, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears, 35 total touches, along with the touchdown, seems to be in firm control of that Chicago backfield. At number 16, how about Chuba Hubbard? This guy's been absolutely awesome, rewarding owners who drafted him in the middle rounds, as he's currently ranked 7th amongst all fantasy football running backs, averaging 18 points per game, including 2 receiving touchdowns. Now we got something very interesting going on here at number 17. It does appear that Seattle Seahawks running back Kenneth Walker III is in a committee with fellow running back Zach Charbonnet. Nonetheless, Walker was quiet in week 1, but very effective in week 2, picking up over 100 rushing yards and a rushing TD at Pittsburgh. That strong game could give him some momentum in regards to carrying more of the workload as the season continues on. Now let's go ahead and take a look at number 18. We're talking about Alvin Kamara. And despite the Saints' mediocre offense and quarterback play, Kamara has still racked up 40 combined touches through the first 2 weeks, averaging 15 points per game, which is excellent in regards to where you were able to land him in your live drafts. Now at number 12, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals has been somewhat of a disappointment this year. He does have a rushing touchdown, and to his credit, you do like the fact that he has 41 total touches. But this Bengals offensive line just doesn't appear to be able to open holes. He has 37 carries, but it's only manufactured 90 yards. That's less than 3 yards per carry. And we've seen a couple years ago the same problem with Joe Mixon, the Bengals' former running back, who got a ton of carries but only averaged 3.2 yards per carry. Now, with Cincinnati starting quarterback Joe Burrow out for the next 3 months, we don't know if that's going to have a positive or negative impact on Chase Brown, but it's certainly something we're going to be keeping a close eye on. Now, at number 19, Aaron Jones for the Minnesota Vikings. Number 20, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. Both of those guys haven't done much early. Now, to Aaron Jones' defense, he does have a receiving touchdown in week 1, but from what I've seen from neither one of those guys, I don't like it, and I find it hard that fantasy football owners like it as well. Right now, you have to be mindful of their matchups. Both of these guys are extremely risky. Until then, make them a flex play at the absolute most. And until we see different, you likely have some better options that you want to go with that you can trust. Now at number 11 and number 13, we're talking about Bucky Irvin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Ashton Genty of the Las Vegas Raiders. Both of those guys play tonight on Monday Night Football, so they only have 1 game underneath their belt. Now let's move on to running backs ranked 21 through 32. First, let's highlight our standouts from the list. And that, without question, is going to be ranked number 26 coming into the season. It's Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. He's hit the ground running with 2 excellent games. Right now, he's ranked 3rd amongst all fantasy football running backs after the first 2 weeks. From where you were able to pick him up in your live drafts, this guy has been an absolute steal so far. The same is going to hold true for Jacksonville Jaguars running back Travis Etienne, who came into the season into a potential committee with Tank Bigsby, ranked at number 29. He currently ranks 9th amongst all fantasy football running backs, pumping in 18 points per game. Next, a guy who the same situation applies to, and that's going to be the Denver Broncos running back J.K. Dobbins. He came into the season ranked 28th as part of a potential committee with rookie R.J. Harvey. But if you look at what Dobbins has done in the first 2 games, he's turned 30 carries into 139 rushing yards, has 2 rushing TDs. That ranks 13th among fantasy football running backs right now. So if you are someone who really cashed in on late round running back picks with Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, and J.K. Dobbins, you have gotten off to an extremely strong start. Now let's move on to our running backs at number 21. Tony Pollard from the Tennessee Titans, 22. Breece Hall of the New York Jets, 23. David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions, and 25. Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. All of those guys have been productive enough in one way or another and have their spots in terms of value and usage on lock within their offense. We've seen Tony Pollard dominate the carries for Tennessee. We've seen Breece Hall be the workhorse for that New York Jets offense as well. When you look at David Montgomery, he's in the same role he's been in the last couple years, excelling, sharing that backfield with Jahmyr Gibbs. And then when you look at Jaylen Warren, he's got 31 combined touches through the first 2 games, has a receiving touchdown. So all of those guys have a lot of good value right now, and you were picking them up in later rounds. A guy who's in trouble right now. We're talking about number 24, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. He has underwhelmed. If he doesn't find a way to pick up production, don't be surprised to see the rookie Cam Scatterbull from Arizona State start to make a push to chew more into his work. At number 27, rookie Amarian Hampton of the Los Angeles Chargers has only 1 game underneath his belt. We know that as Najee Harris continues to get more healthy, then that potential committee will keep a close eye to see if Hampton can keep the lion's share of that backfield. And then rounding out our numbers 30 through 32, we've got running back committees with the Washington Commanders, the Cleveland Browns, the New England Patriots. Those committees are still being figured out. Nothing is concrete and firm. All right, look, that is going to wrap up our segment on running backs. We're going to take one last break. When we come back to the extra points, we'll be shifting our attention over to the wide receiver position. So don't you go anywhere. Football fans, fantasy football owners, welcome back to the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. Let's go ahead and finish up today's show. We'll bring back up our official NFL Explorer rankings board. Again, this board was used for fantasy football owners to help them out with their live drafts. You guys are going to be really excited about the show I have next week when we make our first adjustments to this rankings board, which will be based off of player performance after we've seen the first 3 weeks of the season. All right, let's go ahead and pull up our wide receivers here, ranked 1 through 10, and take a look. And obviously, first and foremost, it was Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Had an underwhelming start in week 1, only 2 catches for 22 yards. But when you look at what Ja'Marr Chase was able to accomplish in week 2 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, 14 big catches, 156 yards, and a touchdown. The big deal, obviously, with Ja'Marr Chase, we'll talk later about T. Higgins, that Bengals offense as a whole. Again, if you have not heard by now, and obviously if you've been watching the show, you have. The Cincinnati Bengals quarterback, Joe Burrow, is going to miss the next 3 months with a toe injury. You guys know the type of connection, the type of trust, the type of timing, the type of chemistry that Ja'Marr Chase has with his quarterback, Joe Burrow. And so I think in the bigger scheme of things, Ja'Marr Chase should be okay. Jake Browning, not a bad quarterback, but I think the Bengals defense is so bad, they'll be in a lot of shootouts. The NFL is a passing league, and Ja'Marr Chase is one of the top performers in fantasy football. He knows how to get open. That offense will figure out a way to get him the ball. If anything, you're just going to taper expectations just a little bit, again, just because of the special connection that Ja'Marr Chase has with quarterback Joe Burrow. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at who else in this top 10 is making it happen right now. You have CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys, has started the season with back-to-back games, up over 100 receiving yards. How about Puka Nacua? He's leading all fantasy football receivers right now, averaging 25.4 points per contest. How about Amon-Ra St. Brown? Turned in a stellar performance in week 2. He had 9 catches for $118 and 3 big TD grabs. Let's move on to Malik Nabers, ranked second right now amongst fantasy football receivers, averaging 24.9 points per contest. It was Tyreek Hill logging his first 100-yard receiving game of the season in week 2 of the season, and that came against the New England Patriots. Now, a couple guys right now who I have mild concerns about, but I know for fantasy football owners, those concerns merit enough attention. I'm talking about number 6, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings, number 9, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, let's talk about Justin Jefferson. We know as an individual player, one of the top 5 receivers without question in the NFL, but he's got a young quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, who only made his second start of his young career this past weekend on Sunday night against the Atlanta Falcons. And you can see J.J. McCarthy is a project. He's a guy who needs time to develop. He is not reading defenses really well. He doesn't trust his eyes, doesn't have good accuracy, doesn't know how to throw receivers open. He's not used to throwing in tight windows, and all of those things matter when it comes to the NFL. And so I think Justin Jefferson is one of those guys right now where you're certainly starting to have some concern. We know that Justin Jefferson, when he's got a very good quarterback, he's always a receiver who's out over 100 catches, 13 to 1,400 yards, 12 to 13 TDs. And I think until J.J. McCarthy can get things figured out, you're going to have to lower your expectations when you talk about the potential production for Justin Jefferson. When I look at Marvin Harrison Jr., the Arizona Cardinals, something a little different. It's not his quarterback. Kyler Murray is a very good quarterback, but I think when you look at that Arizona Cardinals offense, they don't have another good or established wide receiver. And so on a weekly basis, what you're going to see taking place is defenses are going to make it their business to go out and try to stop Marvin Harrison Jr. That means a lot of double coverage. They're rolling a lot of coverage his way, and it can make it extremely difficult for him to have big numbers. One thing when it comes to fantasy football, it is about dominating matchups. And if you look at a weaker defense like Carolina, for Marvin Harrison Jr. to come out of there with only 4 full-point PPR points, that is something that can be of a huge concern. All right, now let's go ahead and move our attention over to wide receivers ranked 11 through 20. And please excuse me, before we get there, and this is going to tie into how bad it's been for him, we're forgetting about A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, ranked number 10 on our list. Through the first 2 games of the season, this guy only has 35 receiving yards, and that is something that is unacceptable. He has done nothing for fantasy football owners' lineups besides give you no production. And for a guy who is that talented, that makes absolutely no sense. Now, I will say again, we know that fantasy football is a matchup-based business. I completely understand. Week 1, tough Dallas Cowboys defense, who when healthy have arguably the best cornerback tandem in DaRon Bland and Trey Diggs. I understand. Week 2, Kansas City Chiefs have one of the better defenses, but 35 receiving yards is completely unacceptable. The good thing I will say is A.J. Brown did have 8 targets in week 2 as opposed to 1 in week 1. But this guy needs to get it turned around right now. And a lot of that is going to fall on that Eagles offensive coordinator and quarterback Jalen Hurts. Now let's move on to 11 through 20. And let's talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. This guy is off to a red hot start for the Seahawks. Back-to-back weeks starting the season, up over 100 receiving yards. Him and quarterback Sam Darnold obviously have chemistry going early. You have to like the hot start there. When you look at the rest of the guys, 11 through 20, even though big stats aren't there, there is a lot of promise. We still have 15 weeks to go. I still like the prospects for Drake London, DJ Moore, Brian Thomas Jr., Terry McLaurin, Garrett Wilson, Calvin Ridley, Cortland Sutton. We got a lot of talented players there, at least through the first 2 weeks for Garrett Wilson and Cortland Sutton. They had a couple TDs. When we move on to wide receivers ranked 21 through 30, a lot of these wide receiver twos got it going in a big way in week 2 when we talk about T. Higgins, Jameson Williams, Devonta Adams, Jalen Waddle, Juwan Jennings, Michael Pittman Jr., Ted McMillan. For the Carolina Panthers, I expect for all of those guys to keep it going. When we look at wide receivers 31 through 40, you have to like early what Deebo Samuels and Zay Flowers are doing to lead that pack, along with George Pickens and Cooper Kupp had a nice game. Stephon Diggs, also another guy who did his thing coming down the stretch. Chris Olave pumping in some nice numbers there late as well. And the guy who is really a standout is Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. When we round our list at 41 through 50, you like the strong start that Ricky Pearsall has gotten off to with the San Francisco 49ers. Also, those Buffalo Bills receivers in Khalil Shakur and Keon Coleman are going to have a bunch of value as the season wears on. All right, that is going to wrap up our show today here on the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show. And as we end our segment, make sure to give me a follow on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Best of luck to you guys in your week 3 matchups, and I look forward to seeing you next week here on the Extra Points Fantasy Football Show, the place where you get expert fantasy advice for champions. Let's go.